In this video, you'll learn about the law of definite proportions. The law of definite proportions is when you have samples of a pure compound that contain the same elements in the same proportion by mass. So think about the details here. You have samples, which means different sample amounts, different gram quantities of a pure compound, and in those different sample quantities, the proportion of elements by mass are going to be the same. A couple of examples will help illustrate this. So let's first take a look at some samples of isooctane, a compound containing 8 carbons and 18 hydrogens. So if we have a sample of 17.600 grams and 26.52 and 23.04, let's imagine somehow the grams of carbon and the grams of hydrogen were determined. How that happened, we're not too concerned about that right now. So these two mass quantities of carbon and hydrogen will sum up to the mass of the sample, the gram amount of the sample. Okay, so if we take the mass ratio of one element to the other, in this case carbon to hydrogen, consistently, I do that for these other two samples, we find that the mass ratio is the same for these different sample amounts. Likewise, if we look at calcium chloride, we have 3 different samples, 50 grams, 20 grams, and 100 grams. And however these gram amounts of the elements were determined, we have the data for them. So we have 18.18 grams of calcium, 32.27 of chloride, etc. for the other two samples. Determine the mass ratio, in this case calcium against chlorine. We determine that, or we see that the mass ratio for calcium to chlorine for these 3 samples of different masses, we have the same mass ratio of the elements.